Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a sustainability leader with a strong background in finance and impact investment from London, UK, Mr. Martin Rich. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. Martin is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Future Fit Foundation. He's a sustainability and impact specialist with nearly 30 years experience in both mainstream and social investment. So, Martin, before we talk about Future Fit Foundation, a few questions for you. Tell me about your journey and what was the inspiration to get into finance that led you to sustainability and impact investment?
That's a good question. It certainly wasn't a planned journey. I think we can say that. So I'm an engineer by training. I studied civil and structural engineering, and I very sort of quickly realized that that wasn't a career I wanted to follow. Banking, the bright lights of the city of London were very attractive, and they said, "Come and learn how the world works." And I did. I went and spent 13 years in big investment banks, working on the trading floors, learning how our financial system works, and as you well know, occasionally doesn't work. Which in some ways was was part of the catalyst for the change.
Yeah.
And after the financial crisis of 2007-8, I was working in the derivative markets, and they obviously suffered very badly and were something of a catalyst for what happened. I decided I wanted to use the finance skills for something more purposeful, more values-led, which was what led me to leave banking and sort of stumble into the impact investment world, which London was really leading the charge of back in the late sort of noughties, early 2010s. And so for a while I worked in that space and I loved it. Again, learned a huge amount about how we can do financing for good, for purpose-led organizations. But through that, began to realize just how narrow and small a market that is. It's brilliant and it does a huge amount of good. But as I said, I'm an engineer, and as an engineer, you start to look at that and say, why are there so many problems? Why are there so many people, if I can use the metaphor, in the emergency room of the hospital? How do we stop these people getting here in the first place? Because that will be better for people in general, but also it means that those who need the emergency services can, they're more efficient in their use. There'll be less people there. They can get better service. And that, of course, very quickly takes you back up the chain to the issues of climate change, social inequity, social injustice. And that really became then the catalyst for what became Future Fit Foundation. Because I said, I want to try and solve, or at least try and tackle some of those bigger issues. Obviously, I'm not going to solve those issues on my own. They're huge. But that, in a nutshell, that was the journey.
And amazing. What an amazing journey. Thank you. So let's talk about the Future Fit Foundation. What was the motivation, or what were the objectives of founding the Future Fit Foundation? And how has the vision that you started off with, how has that evolved?
That's a really good question. So in terms of the genesis of it, through the journey I just described, I was thinking more and more about the investment side. How do we get finance to understand the impact it's having on the planet? I think I was quite an early adopter of saying every investment has an impact. It's just probably not intentional, and it's mostly bad. How do we help financial institutions to understand what that impact is, both the good and the bad, so that they can make informed and intelligent decisions about where they put their money, be they a bank, be they a high net worth individual or a fund manager? And I quite literally bumped into a guy in a coffee queue at a John Elkington event here in London. And he was working in the corporate space at the time, a guy called Dr. Jeff Kendall. And he was very passionate about showing companies how they should change. And he was very dissatisfied by things like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index and MSCI ratings and all of these things. He said, they're rubbish. They're not showing us where we need to actually go. How do we show a company what it actually needs to be.
Mm.
And I said, this is amazing. If we solve your problem, then a portfolio is simply an aggregate of multiple individual companies.
Right,
So if we show
right.
one company, we can show a whole portfolio.
Mm.
Let's go quit our well-paying jobs. Let's start a charity, and let's create that mechanism,
Mm.
which we both thought was a great idea at the time. Which is what we did. And then we went and sat in a coffee shop in London and said, great, so we've quit jobs. We have no money, we have no funding, we have no idea how we're going to do this, and we're going to try and rewire the entire global socioeconomic system.
Mm.
Where do we start?
Mm.
But that was literally how we got going.
Right.
The vision at the time was and still is to produce the methodology which shows company what the rules of the game
Mm.
must be if they are going to be within the planetary and societal boundary conditions. So if we think for a second that every action you take that is outside the boundary conditions
Mm.
is causing harm, it's degenerative. Anything that you're doing that keeps us inside the boundaries
Mhm.
could be viewed as being regenerative.
Right.
So how do we show companies a generic set of rules that they then apply to themselves and say, if we can do this, we're moving in the right direction? And
Right.
that's what our key tool, the business benchmark, Future Fit Business Benchmark, is. There's 600 plus pages of online guidance taking you all the way through it, online tools, everything, all available in open source right now.
Mm.
We're beginning to produce it in multiple languages, courtesy of the wonders of AI. We probably will do a Hindi version or something like that at some
Mhm.
point. So
Mhm.
any of your listeners in India, hopefully will, I mean, most of your business community
Yeah.
speak English
Yeah.
anyway, but we will hopefully have an Indian version at some point. Um, I suppose the vision has evolved, not so much in terms of the actual core methodology. We
Mm.
still have that same vision. But I think what we have seen shift, and regular listeners to your podcast will be familiar with this. The world has evolved immensely over the last 10 years in terms
Right.
of its understanding of sustainability, to use the
Yeah.
expression. But
Mm.
then how do we start to tackle more of the social inequality,
Mm.
climate change? Now, obviously, this is a roller coaster.
Mhm.
Um, not mentioning any particular jurisdictions by name, but there are some which are
Sure.
perhaps less friendly to this agenda than they have been in the past.
Mm.
So I think it's more for us a case of constantly evolving how we place ourselves
Mm.
into a very complex and cramped field
Mhm.
and help people to understand what we are and importantly what we're not,
Sure.
and what it is we're trying to
Mm.
achieve.
Mm. Well said. And Martin, what, in your view, does a truly sustainable future for all look like? And how is the foundation helping the world move towards that goal?
So I go back to this concept of the system boundaries.
Mhm.
Ultimately, a flourishing society needs a flourishing planet, and actually vice versa. I strongly believe that we can't have one
Mm.
without the other. So for me, a flourishing future is one where, from a very scientific perspective, we are living within those boundary conditions. So pollution, waste, carbon, etc., are things of the past. True circularity and efficient usage of resources and materials is just the common thing, as is the concept that business is there to serve society, not vice versa, and that actually every organization is pursuing social and environmental
Mm.
good. And by that, I don't mean just a bit of greenwashing. I mean actual value
Yeah.
creation for society and the planet as
Mm.
well. And through that, being financially sustainable
Mm.
rather than today, where we're just pursuing, finance at the cost of everything else.
Mm. Mm.
So in a very technical description, is how I would see it. But from a what does it mean to live in that world sort of perspective?
Mm.
For me, again, it's about empowerment, it's about equity, it's about local communities and national communities having ownership of a vision for what an inclusive, flourishing community and society looks like for
Mm.
them. So all of this work is about how can we provide guardrails and guidelines for people. But, ultimately, I'm not trying to sort of like, reinvent colonialism by the back door. This is about empowering local communities and local people say, this is what we want. Now, there are rules and boundaries that we're all going to have to collectively agree to play by. So, again, zero carbon emissions is just a simple example. So we all have to agree to play by those rules because that's actually for the broader benefit of all of us, bringing climate change back under control, trying to at least move ourselves back into a more stable climatic situation. It's ultimately for the benefit of everybody. So we all have to do that. But what does it mean then for that to come out in terms of flourishing the color, the sound, the smell, the taste of a future fit society for where you are? And this is something, Ashutosh, we've done. We launched very recently with our Vision 2070 project, which I would heartily encourage any of your listeners to go and have a look at, vision2070.org. We're trying to crowdsource positive visions of the future. So you can just go to that website and you can just talk to the little AI bot there, and you can tell it your vision of the future and record that. And we're trying to crowdsource thousands of visions just to answer this question. Yes, there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of negative issues out there, and it's right that we are concerned and indeed scared about these things. But being scared doesn't normally motivate people to good behavior. What motivates them is saying, what's the alternative story? Can we have a flourishing future for 8 billion people on the planet? I believe we can. I really believe we can. It will look different to what we have today, and it will take a lot of bravery to shift. But if we can paint a global vision and we can start to get millions, billions of people behind that, then humanity has an amazing ability to achieve these things. So, yeah.
Well said. Moving on, could you talk to us a little bit about the Future Fit business benchmark?
Absolutely.
How does this work?
So the idea that these planetary and societal boundary conditions are a line in the sand, a break-even point, if you like, are pretty well understood in scientific terms these days. And the underlying framework that we've built off is the same thing that people like Kate Raworth has used for donut economics, Johan Rockström used as the foundation for planetary boundaries. That underlying system science helps us to understand the principles we must live by, but it's all very complex, it's esoteric, and it's very not usable for a business. And if you showed them to, a business chief executive, she may well turn around and say, well, that's lovely, Martin, but what do I do with it?
Yeah.
What the Future Fit Business Benchmark seeks to do is translate that into meaningful actions. So we have a whole series of goals that say these are the things you must or must not be doing to not breach the conditions. And again, at a high level, they're written in very simple terms: zero waste, zero carbon emissions, everybody must be paid at least a living wage, etc., etc. And we define all of that terminology and everything very clearly. And we provide people with a 0 to 100% scale so they can start to measure where are they today versus where they need to be not causing harm, not breaching the conditions. And the idea is that you ultimately start to measure across all of these goals and start to then set your goals and targets, short, medium, long-term targets, to move yourself up and ultimately push the measurement up to as close to 100% across all of those as you can possibly get. And at the same time, be thinking about, okay, why do we exist? What is our purpose? What are we here for? Is it just money? That's not a purpose.
Sure.
Purpose, that should be the outcome of you delivering your purpose well. Why does society or the planet want you to exist? What is the positive systemic value you're bringing? And how do you start doing more of that in a way that is not causing harm? And will be a different business model probably to the one you've got today. So a vision of what you could be, a way to measure where you are today. And as you know, when you go on a journey, well, you need to know where you're starting. You need to know where it is you're going. And therefore, what do you need to do to equip yourself to to then make that journey. So that is what Future Fit is at its heart. It's a roadmap, it's a framework, it's a GPS to
Mm.
help guide you and your organization
Yeah.
to be able to play your role in this vision of the Future Fit society.
Mm. Great response. But tell me, how does this approach help companies move beyond compliance towards the regenerative impact?
I think it's a carrot and stick sort of situation, if you like.
Mhm.
Regulation and compliance is typically the stick.
Mm.
And it is almost always by definition the lowest bar. And it's trying to get everybody to raise,
Mm.
raise that lowest foundation to
Mm.
to a barely minimum sort of acceptable level.
Mm.
Future Fit is the carrot.
Mm.
It's the vision of where we want to get. Now, I would love one day for us to be living in a world where actually compliance and regulation meant
Mm.
being future fit.
Yeah.
But honestly, we're such a long way from that point
Mm.
that it's almost impossible to imagine that regulations are, collectively going
Correct.
to take us there.
Correct.
Some
Correct.
already are, and
Mhm.
increasing regulations again. I'm just using the carbon example. I don't want people to think future fit is only about carbon. It's absolutely not.
Mm.
But it's one that's widely understood. The idea then of setting these zero targets is moving us in that direction. So that would be one of our indicators. It's like compliance is catching up to the where we would like the bar to be set.
Mm.
But in many other ways, the regulatory bar is low. So we would always say, look, you have to be compliant with regulation. Of course you do that, but that's hygiene.
Yeah.
That's basic business. And one of the mindset shifts that we need to see, Ashutosh, is we need to say, look, getting to compliance isn't an ambition.
Correct.
It's the bare minimum.
Mm.
You should be doing this as a matter of course.
Yeah.
Don't achieve compliance and give yourself a pat on the back.
Mm.
That's where you should be starting.
Yeah.
You need to be raising your eyes and looking forward for what could we really achieve. And again,
Mm.
Future Fit then is about saying, okay, great, you've done the compliance,
Mm.
but what could and from a societal perspective should you
Mm.
be doing to take us where
Mm.
we need to be?
Amazing. Yet the other challenge I have often seen with a lot of organizations is how do they strike a balance between long-term systemic change
Mm,
and the immediate pressures that
yeah.
they face from markets and stakeholders? How do you support them?
I mean, that right there is the nub of the problem.
Correct.
Um, and I'm an ex-investment banker. I totally understand those pressures and concerns.
Mm.
At the same time, we are not talking about a nicety
Mm.
or a useful thing to have.
Yeah.
We need to wake up to the reality that what we are doing
Mm.
to the planet and society
Mm.
is utterly destructive and utterly existential.
Mm.
And I know that the risk of this line of thought is people sort of say, oh, scaremongering and all the rest of it. It sadly it's not scaremongering. It's a reality. So on one level, we have to respond to these things.
Mm.
Else in 20 to 30 years' time, it will be far too late. And quarterly reports and all the rest of it will be utterly meaningless
Yeah.
because there is no business to be done on
Correct.
a dead planet.
Mm.
So, level one, these are existential changes, and we need to be having a grown-up global conversation.
Mm.
These quarterly, reporting cycles and day-to-day pressures,
Mm.
they are not mandated
Yeah.
by God.
Mm.
They are a human construct,
Correct.
which we can change if we want to. But the
Mm.
problem we have is, corporates point at investors and say, oh, investors want quarterly returns. Investors point to the underlying capital owners and say they want the capital to go up. Capital owners point at governments and say, well, it should be governments that want to change things. And governments say, well, I'm on a 3 to 5 year cycle. I want to be voted back in again. So I'm not going to make any difficult long-term
Mm.
choices. And
Mm.
so we just sort of, we go round and round
Yeah.
in this circle. And what we ideally would have is sort of a UN or a body where global government comes together
mm, mm,
and says, look, we need to recognize this. We need to move together. Now, again, sadly, you and I know that right now
mm.
that sort of doesn't feel very much like
Correct,
it's
correct.
going to happen.
Mm,
Um, I wish it would. But I think we need to therefore, as private sector, we need to wake up to these challenges. And ultimately, I think there is a very strong argument that says
mm,
we are set for decades of great uncertainty.
mm,
Out of the back of those, there is a good scenario where humanity survives and flourishes, and there is a
mm.
terrible scenario where there's nobody left to write the history anymore.
Yeah,
Um, we clearly want one of those two outcomes. But
correct.
those who move now are ultimately going to be much better
Mm,
placed to flourish into that better
yeah.
future. So I actually think not only is it better for society, but it's actually better in the longer term for those businesses. Now, it
Mm,
may cost them in the short term, and that
mm,
is the biggest challenge that we have.
mm,
So we need collectively to get over this short-sightedness, and if we don't, unfortunately, I fear the repercussions from that are going to
mm,
be very, very bad. We've got to lift our eyes. We've got to look longer term. We have to look at the cultures and the sort of indigenous cultures or countries which have a longer term mindset. I mean, I think
mm,
if you look, say, to China, that sort of multi long-term generational
mm,
approach, or something like Native American seventh generation type approaches. There may be an Indian example you could give me, Ashutosh.
mm.
But that I think that, unfortunately, the European Northern Western mindset has become incredibly short-term focused,
Correct.
and that is terrible.
Mm,
We absolutely have to break out of that. If I
yeah,
knew how to do that, I would bottle it.
I'm sure.
I'd be giving it away tomorrow.
Yes, yes. I have time for two more questions for you, Martin. How do you see the sustainability landscape evolving over the next few years, especially in the light of AI,
Mm.
geopolitics, and climate urgency?
Wow, that's a small question. So look, I think what's happening right now is we're seeing a real bifurcation in the market, in that there are those who are doubling down and are committed to this, and there
Mm,
are those who we often refer to as the sustainability tourists,
mm,
who came in whilst it was trendy and have now all run away
yeah.
when it's getting hard.
Mm,
I don't think that's a bad thing,
mhm,
actually. Although the majority is still in the wrong camp from my
mm,
perspective,
mm,
I far prefer people who are honest about where they are on the journey. So we need to do more to support those who are committed, and we need to, continue to cajole and try and persuade those who aren't to sort of move
mm,
back over in this
mm.
direction. I think the urgency will only increase because the climate is not going to get any more
Yeah.
stable. We're going to see far more disruption, heat waves, floods, droughts, all fires, all the rest of it.
Mm,
And that is going to cause massive disruption.
mm,
That will shake things up. Geopolitics, again, as I said a few minutes ago, I think unfortunately, that doesn't feel like it's going to get a lot better in the next couple of years.
mhm,
America has staked out its position very plainly.
mm,
It's hard to see that particularly changing for the next
mm,
few years.
mm.
So I suppose the at least the certainty is the uncertainty. Um, and I think in a way, what we're going to see is America lose any form of leadership in that space. I think right now, Europe, for all of its failings, is leading from a
Yeah.
sustainability perspective.
Mm.
But I actually think Asia and Southeast Asia are going to come accelerating past us in
Right.
the coming years.
Yes.
I've spent quite a bit of time in Japan and China and Singapore, a little bit of time in India. I want to spend more time there. But I think particularly the Indian and Chinese economies, they have an amazing opportunity to grow in a much better way.
Yeah.
And I think all of that together means we're going to see, certainly from a sustainability point of view, we're going to see a massive rise
Mm.
in what they are doing,
Mm.
really leading the way. I think Europe will sort of continue to follow in the wake of that, and that will be all very, very positive.
Mm.
Say, America will fade in that regard for a while. We'll see what happens longer term there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, hopefully Africa and South America are able then to, pick up on the and benefit from the best of what is happening in those things. But again, very very hard to look in the crystal ball and work out what's
I
happening
agree.
there.
And I agree with you completely. And my last question for you, if you could embed one principle from Future Fit into the DNA of every organization tomorrow, what would it be?
Gosh, I think it would be the concept of the creation of systemic value embedded into the heart of everything they do. So whatever their product is, whatever their service is, that is delivered in a way where the social and environmental value is critical, not an add-on, not a nice to have, absolutely central and core. And then just imagine, what would the world be like actually a week later if we all embedded that and said we want to be successful across all of these metrics, yes, financial, but primarily in environmental and or societal value that we're creating. And we as a global society started then to see that as a measurement of success, not how much are you worth, not how much money did you make, but what was the true value that you brought to society in this last week. I think that would radically change things overnight. So yeah, if I had that wish, I think that's what it would be.
Amazing. Wow. And on that note, I just want to say, Martin, what an amazing conversation this has been. I think
Thank you.
it's been a lot of learning for not just for me, but for a lot of my viewers and listeners as well. Thank you for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about the Future Fit Foundation, about sustainability and impact. Thank you again, and good luck to you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.